I need some healing in my life, someone who cares like Bradley cared, yes, someone who shares all of the joy of family, one who believes we can be free, yes, we can be free. Elaine, 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 Elaine. Mind, body, and soul, yes. Mind, body, and soul, yes. Hey! Elaine, 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 Elaine. Mind, body, and soul, yes. Mind, body, and soul, yes. I need some incense and some sage, natural capacity to pray. Live off the land, yes, live off the land. Hey! Lend me some oil from the tree, give me some lavender quickly. Heal from the pain, heal from the pain. Elaine, 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 Elaine. Mind, body, and soul, yes. Mind, body, and soul, yes. Elaine, 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 Elaine. Mind, body, and soul. Mind, body, and soul.
Hi, everyone. We'll get started in a couple minutes, but I'll give people a couple minutes just to come on in. All right, in the interest of time, and I see the numbers still going up, hopefully people who are coming in a little bit late won't miss anything, but I do want to kind of welcome everyone for coming here and really set the stage for this panel. I think it's going to be an incredible discussion today about the ways that the education system can support families and children with incarcerated loved ones. I do want to take a second and pass it over to Mia, who's going to do a land acknowledgement before we start.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I would like to say good evening. My name is Mia Barksdale, and I'll be giving the land acknowledgement today. Before I start this land acknowledgement, it is a bit different because we are all scattered throughout the states and joined here together by Zoom. I want to inform you that if you type in native-land.ca into your web browser, you can find out all the land that you are currently living on and working on. If every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who have contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to making the history that led up to this moment. Some were brought against their will, some were drawn to leave their distant homes, and some have lived on the land for more than generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect, connections across all barriers of heritage and difference. We began this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. I am currently on this beautiful ancestral land of Lenape, land of the Lenape tribe, of an offspring of the Algonquian civilization. Please take a moment to consider many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us here today. Think about the systems such as our injustice system that have been taken apart and removal of families from their homes. Think about the many ways, think about the way the land was once treated and held sacred. Remember the resiliency of Indigenous peoples. I encourage you, when you leave here, to continue to uncover the truths at any and all public events. Remember you walk in sacred places. Lastly, take a moment to recognize the ancestors, past, present, and future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mia. And I think that was really important to set the stage and honor the legacy of the land that we sit on right now. So I encourage everyone to look up the land that they occupy. But I will briefly set the stage of this panel and then go into introductions. And like I said, in the interest of time, I will be brief, but a major theme of this panel is going to be myth busting and really busting the myths when it comes to supporting children of incarcerated parents, especially when it comes to the education system. There are lots of ideas about what we should do for the best. Maybe we should keep this unworthy parent with a felony record away from their child because it's scaring them. That's for the best. Or maybe we should report a family to police and follow handle with care protocols because, you know, that's for the best. Or maybe we should police children of incarcerated parents because they're more likely to commit crimes because that's for the best. And we found that those things do not have the best outcomes for children with incarcerated loved ones. So I offered today a panel of 5 experts who will give you personal and professional expertise to really comment on what is best for them and their communities and how schools and the entire education system as a whole, which includes people who come into contact with students or teachers on a daily basis, can support them and give them what they actually need. So with that, I will start a round of introductions. I'll go first. We'll do name, pronouns, location, and all of your relevant identities, professional or not. So my name is Olivia Elder, pronoun she, her. I am sitting here in Washington, D.C. today, and I identify as a woman religious, as a dancer, as an advocate, as a daughter and a sister, and a lover of really good food. And so with that, I'll pass that to Brandon, who's right next to me on the Zoom screen.
I did my muted check. I'm Brandon Cardet Hernandez. I am currently in Boston, Massachusetts. I identify as Latinx, identify as gay, as a father to a wonderful son, as a son myself, as a brother, and as an organizer and someone who is committed to seeing young people win. And I'm going to pass it to Diane.
Great, thanks. Hi, I'm Diane Wallace Booker. Pronouns are she, her. Calling in from Laurel, Maryland, which is just outside of Washington, D.C. And I identify as I'm a Black woman, although I'm half white and half Black. I am an American, although I'm half American and half British. I have been a mother to 2 wonderful children and a wife of 29 years, and consider myself to be an advocate for young people, particularly young people who've been significantly impacted by systemic inequities. I am going to pass it to Shannon.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Shannon Ellis, and my pronouns are she, her, and I am identifying from, I'm in Philadelphia, and I identify as a Black woman, an activist, an advocate, and an ally, and I am also a former athlete. And I'm going to pass it to Mia.
Hi. So my pronouns are she, her. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I'm a former student. I graduated in May from Mercy College. I'm also an advocate for youth who experience parental incarceration like myself. So yeah. I would like to pass it to, sorry, the chat's in my way. Asia.
So, hi, I'm Asia. My pronouns are she and her. I'm joining you guys from Panama City. I'm in Central America, very far yet very close. I identify as an Afro-Latina. My main identity is I am a mother to 2 amazing teenagers. I have been a fierce advocate for my children, and I have been able to help other women do the same with their children. But in addition to that, I am a daughter. I am a graduate from Marymount Manhattan College. I was also formerly incarcerated for 17 years, and I'm just here believing that children of incarcerated parents should have the best opportunities regardless of the mistakes that parents make.
I want to thank all the panelists so much for sharing a little bit and introducing themselves. You'll notice we'll get into professional affiliations later and people will talk about their work. But I think it was really impactful and important to have people talk about all the ways they identify and everything that informs them as they come to this work. I think every single piece of your identity really is part of your expertise, and you'll hear people speak from all different parts of their identities tonight. And so with that, I will pass it to Tanya for a short video, and then we'll go into some panelist questions.
As children of incarcerated parents, we are often asked about our parents' incarceration.
9 times out of 10, we are approached wrong and become uncomfortable.
Here are tips from our first-hand experience.
Do not put us on the spot or in an uncomfortable situation. Instead, avoid re-traumatization by picking up on our body language and cues that show we do not want to talk about it.
Do not ask why my parent is incarcerated or how long they'll be there. Instead, understand that it is not easy to talk about. Give me my privacy.
Do not treat me differently because of my parents' experience. Instead, treat me the same as my peers and believe in my ability to achieve greatness just as everyone else.
Do not try to relate to my experience. My experience is my own. If I feel comfortable enough to say, yeah, my dad is in jail right now, don't reply with, oh, I feel that. My parents are divorced, so I don't see my dad that often either. Instead, listen, offer me programs and resources, or don't try to relate at all.
Do not minimize my experience. Instead, ask me how I'm feeling and understand that my feelings are valid.
Do not ask questions like, are you afraid to become incarcerated like your parent? Instead, reassure us that we are our own person. Give us positive affirmations.
Do not use words like criminal or felon. Instead, be mindful of your language and replace it with incarcerated person or justice-involved individuals.
For more information on how to support children of incarcerated parents, join the See Us Support Us network and follow us on social media. And remember,
See Us Support Us. Join SUSU.
All right, I first of all want to thank all of the youth participants and contributors who provided their own perspectives for the do's and don'ts. I think a lot of those things aren't intuitive for people, even practitioners that work with children every day. And it's really, really important to bring people in who are directly impacted or who are on the front lines of this crisis to ask them what is helpful and what isn't helpful. So I wanted to start with the panelists and start off before we get into, like I said, more individual questions. What resonated when you heard that video? Are there particular do's in your line of work, particular things that are super unhelpful that you don't want to see anymore? And what are your recommendations for those? And for that, I'll just go in the order that I see people on my screen. I'll start with Shannon. Was there anything in that video that really resonated with you in your work?
Yeah, so for those of you who do not know, I work for the School District of Philadelphia in the Office of School Climate and Culture. And as we are rolling out the Joining Forces curriculum by Dr. Whitney Hollins, we are thinking about how we can train our staff. And one of the biggest things that we were thinking about is changing our language. So changing our language in just our forms, and then also training our teachers and our school counselors on how to respond to students when we are rolling out our community meeting. We have a community meeting curriculum that we roll out. We have our students have a community meeting each morning, and we adapted some of the Joining Forces curriculum lessons to implement in our community meetings. And we talk about recognizing when our students are feeling upset or internalizing, we are also training our teachers on being able to recognize some internalizing behaviors and also externalizing behaviors and recognizing when they should suggest that the students go to see their school counselor.
Thank you. And I think it's a very important piece to train educators who deal with students every single day on recognizing behavior and sending them to get services and get help. And that is a major piece, a major tool in this fight, something that every school should be doing. With that, I will pass it to Diane. And if we could actually start these with professional affiliations, what you're working on, and then how the do's and don'ts video resonated with your work. What are the do's and don'ts that you see?
Sure. So my professional affiliation is I am the Chief Strategy Officer and Executive Vice President for the U.S. Dream Academy. And we are a national organization that provides after-school and mentoring programs for children who have parents incarcerated and for kids who are falling behind in school. So it's a dual population. And we very specifically target communities that have been impacted by poverty, high rates of arrest, and a failing Title I school. So we kind of recognize that we're reaching a certain group of young people that are experiencing multiple risk factors. So not all kids who have parents incarcerated are living in poverty, and but we did target a pretty specific community that have certain risk factors within that community. And one of the things that stood out for me as I'm watching the video, and we've been doing this for 23 years. So when we started this, they were not talking about children of incarcerated parents in schools. It was pretty much of a taboo subject. And when we would go in to talk to principal or teachers about it, principals would be like, oh my gosh, where have you guys been? We experienced this and we don't know how to appropriately respond. The principals often understood that they didn't know and they had a challenge and they needed help, but they couldn't find it because the resources just were not so available. So as I watch these young people talk so, just be so transparent and really like the stuff that these research books have come out and told us, these kids could tell us, right? we didn't necessarily, we do need the research, but what we really needed back then was giving young people a platform and a safe place to be able to talk about these things. So it's really nice to see the progression over the last 23 years, as Shannon talked about social emotional learning and internalized and externalized behaviors and how they're doing that inside of schools. It just was unheard of 25 years, except in small little enclaves. So I want to just recognize that we have come a long way. I think we've got a long way to go, but we are in a better place, I think, in terms of being able to both recognize, lift up, and definitely give creating and making youth voice that pertinent, relevant, important expert voice on the subject.
I completely agree. The fact that we have this do's and don'ts video, I think, is incredible. Even when I was in high school, this was still something that was not talked about at all. It was very under the table. There was a lot of shame and stigma. And so seeing the ways that this movement has moved so quickly to address the needs of young people, but also empower them, has been really, really incredible. So thank you so much for sharing that. I will pass it to Mia, if you can give professional affiliation, as well as how the do's and don'ts resonate with your work.
Yeah, so I currently work as a SUSU Youth Fellow with the Oswin Association. That's like my professional experience. Yeah, so something that resonated with me the most during this video is the fact that when one of the youth brought up, don't pity me, or in the sense that if you're trying to relate to me, don't say like, oh, my parents are divorced, like, you know what I mean? Like, and in the sense that we don't want you to pity us, but in the sense that we want you to understand and listen, and also ask questions, but don't pry too much, you know what I mean? And don't judge us because of our parents' mistakes and put that upon us because, we're not our parents. So in the sense that we're not going to commit the same things that they've done, and we're different. And we just want the understanding. So yeah.
I agree. Very important to let youth lead and also not push boundaries as well. Asia, if you want to give any professional affiliations, what you're working on, what you've worked on, and how the do's and don'ts video resonated with you.
Well, I guess I'm a professional in the fact that I raise my children from afar. So I experienced firsthand the uncomfortability that my children experienced when they had to explain that their mom was in prison. It wasn't something that they did often, but one particular situation I remember when my daughter went to her guidance counselor and said, "My mom wants to talk to you, she's incarcerated." And she was asked, "Is it okay? Are you okay with me speaking to your mom?" And my daughter's kindly answered, "Of course, that's my mom." Don't assume that you have to protect my child from me. Get to know the situation, understand, ask questions before you assume that I am not allowed to be in my child's life, because I am allowed to be in her life. In fact, I fought very hard to be a part of her life, and understanding that every situation is different, and regardless of the fact that someone is incarcerated, their relationship, my relationship with my children, was detrimental to their well-being, as it was determined by a family court judge. And those things were being overlooked by her guidance counselor, who refused to speak to me for a very long time. But understanding that we should take what the child wants into consideration when it comes to an incarcerated parent, and how necessary and important it is to have us in their lives. And I did this obviously from Bedford Hills Correctional Facility with the help of the Children's Center and Our Children, who is the program at the facility, and the resources that were available to me. And I was able to contact the schools and be persistent, and in some cases annoying, because it was necessary in order to be a mother to my children. And I'm very proud of that.
I think you should be. I think that is very much a professional affiliation. You are an expert here. And that's part of the reason why we have you on this panel, to share your expertise and your lived experience as a subject matter expert in this. And finally, I will pass it to Brandon to share a little bit about your professional affiliations, and also how the do's and don'ts resonated with you in your work.
Thank you so much. And it was great to just listen to everyone as well. So thank you guys for sharing. My background is in sort of lifelong educator. I was a public school teacher in New York City for students with special needs, a principal in the South Bronx, a turnaround principal. Most recently, I was Mayor Bill de Blasio's education advisor, senior education advisor. And I just moved to Boston, and I am the executive director of a nonprofit organization called Ivy Street. And we work with young people who are neurodivergent. So think autism, ADD, a mix of sort of health issues, but mostly have been at the center of a lot of trauma. And so we do school in sort of the most traditional sense, though we try to blow it up. And then we do a lot of healing work. And what resonated with me from the young people, it was sort of when I zoomed out and I thought, at every corner in anyone's experience, we need to ask them the do's and don'ts for them. And how real is that, regardless of where our sort of lives go or don't go? We all deserve to be asked, what do we want? And how do we want to be treated? And how much do we want to talk about or share at any given moment? And even more importantly, for every single young person who shared their do's and don'ts, that is a do and don't at a given moment. And that gets to evolve as they get to evolve. And that's the beauty of being a person, particularly a young person, but for all of us as well. We get to evolve in how we want to talk about our life and how we want other people to engage in our story.
I love that so much. And I think it touches on something that you don't always hear, that you're allowed to say something one day and not say something to someone you don't trust, or the next day, and giving people the space to evolve. I think you touch on something really important as well. These are people who have had varying experiences with trauma and with family separation, but they're people, and you have to treat them as such, and really ask them, like Asia was saying, ask a child what their relationship is with their parent, if appropriate, and see what they say for their do's and don'ts. That is so important, and you'll see that come up throughout this panel. That's one of the number one takeaways, is to really consider individual boundaries and individual relationships as they come up. With that, I'll shift a little bit into kind of the individual work that all of you guys have been doing, and the takeaways I think individually you can give to attendees. So I'll go with the pre-discussed order, so not exactly the same order as before. But I'll start with Diane. So as you've seen from the answers in the do's and don'ts, there has been a bit of a focus on what individual educators can do. In the previous panel last week, you heard a lot about what individual educators can do. What are some systems level changes that can be made to support students with incarcerated parents that can be done on the administrative level?
Yeah, it's just a great question. And I do think that we are starting to see some of that in ways we haven't. I mean, what Shannon described and what they're doing in Philadelphia, embedding practices around social emotional learning and trauma-informed practices into their training and creating and making it an expectation that teachers, incorporate this into their teaching. I think a greater emphasis at the administrative level on how we create supportive environments for kids based on relationships. And a lot of what we've talked about, even when you hear the do's and don'ts, it really is about being in relationship with people. When the young lady said, read my body language, right? When you're in relationship with people, that's what you do. You're reading your body language, you're trying to be sensitive, and I think too often education has been seen as a more transactional thing. I teach, you learn, and I teach the way I want to teach, regardless of how you learn. We've seen this shift, and I think that at the administrative level, we do have to do more to talk about this topic, that this it's a big issue, because it's not just about, right, parents incarcerated. It is sort of a bigger issue that impacts particularly the communities that we're in, which is really around mass incarceration and inequities, and how do we embed that into school practices. I mean, when we started going into schools, we got a lot of criticism from within the field that schools aren't ready for this. You shouldn't have your programs inside of schools. You're going to out families. You're going to cause more shame and stigma for families, if you have your program in schools. And we pushed back against that, this idea that we got to break the ice somewhere. We have to start the conversation somewhere. And what we found is when we could go into schools and do training with principals and teachers and begin to really help them understand not only the trauma and the impact of parental incarceration on kids, but even for their own selves, right? Beginning to understand their own trauma that they were bringing into the school and into the classroom, and how they began to understand this more deeply, I think was a really impactful to create and sensitize the environment. So if we could do that at one school, we could begin to do that right at an administrative level. And we have models for this, right? We have a practice for when kids' parents who are in the military and their parent gets deployed. There's a whole practice for how we treat and how we operate and what teachers do, and how the education military guy will step in and actually come to principal meetings if the kid gets in trouble. There's an advocate there for that person when their parent is gone. Everybody recognizes that their adult protective shield is gone, and we need to have some other practice. We have practices for kids who are experiencing homelessness. There's a practice for what, and everybody knows, and we're doing it, the practices for kids who have disabilities. And so not to stigmatize, but to recognize that there are other challenges in their life when a parent goes away. And how do we as a school system and a community in relationship support them? So I've seen it happen in individual schools, and I think that at the administrative level, we could do that same thing so that it gets really infused throughout the whole school system.
Yeah, I think one thing that you said that really is resonating with me right now is that we already have models for this. Like, this isn't new or groundbreaking. There are ways that we support students who are dealing with different kinds of traumas. Why not expand that support to people who are experiencing this particular kind of trauma? And I know that sometimes there's pushback from people who are more established in their careers who are like, adding another thing that's so difficult, but it's not. There are models for doing this. And I think that those finding ways to support students really does trickle up. And one thing for people who don't know, I'm from the South, so I spend a lot of time outside, a lot of time thinking about water and plants and reading the Farmer's Almanac. But we've heard the phrase, a rising tide lifts all boats. But if you spend time around water and fishing, a rising tide lifts all boats, but the current flows from the bottom. it flows from the bottom and pushes all the water up. And so when you think about these solutions that exist, you have to address these students, and the benefits really do trickle up. You also talked about how that helps educators and administrators address their own trauma. And if you could speak briefly a little bit about the trickle up effects of this work, how that might help people at the top by helping the kids who are at the bottom.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when we really take the time and really put the time and the study and the effort into understanding young people, that what we use this phrase that youth work is self-work. The more you are really intentional about understanding young people, the more you have to go inside yourself. You got to resolve your own childhood trauma. You have to understand, and I don't know what happens to us as adults. Every adult has been a child at some point in their lives. And then it seems like we become adults and then this becomes this sort of truncated, separated part of our lives. And then we begin to treat children in these really inappropriate, ineffective ways. And if we received it ourselves, without intervention, we don't really know how to interrupt that cycle. So if I grew up in a home or in a school where I wasn't respected, where my voice wasn't counted, where I wasn't challenged to grow, where you didn't share power, then I don't know how to now break that. And so adults have to go through that process themselves for them to be able to fully, I think, engage in really effective, meaningful ways with young people. So this youth work is self-work. So I think if you're the educator and you're working with young people, you understand I got to do my own work on this. I do think that helps all the kids in that classroom, not just the kids who have a parent incarcerated. When that teacher becomes much more in tune with him or herself and understands that teaching is a relationship and that learning is a very personal thing, and that I can't just teach one way. I got to develop a relationship. Every single kid in that classroom is going to benefit significantly, whether they are experiencing trauma or not. So I think that's sort of that's going to that trickle up kind of process for us.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Youth work is self-work. I want that on a t-shirt. I think that's so important. As you think about supporting kids with different needs, you're also supporting adults who might have been those children. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But I myself, as a practitioner in this work, I very much remember myself as a youth and what it is that I needed. And I have to address that to do the work that I do. So I want to thank you, Diane, so much for sharing that. I want to move into Shannon. So that was a more higher level strategic approach of what can be done on a larger scale. Shannon is working specifically on building that curriculum and implementing a curriculum that was designed by a very good friend of this movement, Dr. Whitney Hollins, and implementing that district-wide. So I wanted to get more information about some of the educational pieces that you have integrated into this curriculum, specifically about being more race aware and trauma informed. I wanted to hear, why is that important? Which I know sounds like a very easy question, but why is that important when talking about children of incarcerated parents? Why should we understand the history of mass incarceration and slavery and the history of trauma?
Yeah, so thank you for that. And I just want to start by saying that the School District of Philadelphia adopted board goals and guardrails for their 2021-2022 school year. Basically, in response to some of the guardrails were in response to some of the events that occurred in 2020 with the murder of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and also Breonna Taylor. And the board goals really speak to academic goals, right? So math and ELA goals, and our guardrails are what is keeping us on track in order to be aligned with our mission and also our vision. So we have 5 academic goals, and then we have 4 guardrails. So our first guardrail is having welcoming and supportive environments in our school communities. Our second guardrail is rich and fun experiences for our students. Our third guardrail is involving partnering with parents and families. And then our fourth one is addressing and dismantling racist practices. So I wanted to just speak to what Diane mentioned about relationships, and the School District of Philadelphia, in response to the pandemic and having been home for so long and just a lot of the social unrest that we had, the Office of School Climate and Culture instituted a mandatory community meeting each morning in our K-8 schools and 2 times a week in our high schools. And the whole purpose of instituting the community meetings in high schools and in K-8 schools is to build those relationships that Diane was just speaking about. And how we are measuring that, we actually have instituted what we're calling a student well-being survey. So we are literally asking students each month how they are feeling about school. And the survey gives us results in how they are feeling about their relationships with their adults in their school, relationship with peers, and then also their interpersonal relationships. So how they feel like they are managing their own emotions and handling and responding. So I wanted to give you all that background. As Olivia has mentioned, I am working on implementing the Joining Forces curriculum, and how I was able to implement as Diane has mentioned, historically, it's very hard to say, hey, let's do something to support children with incarcerated parents. Although we know in Philadelphia and in a lot of other urban areas, our Black and Brown students are disproportionately, and families are disproportionately impacted by incarceration, right? It was very easy for the School District of Philadelphia to approve me to implement this curriculum because of our guardrails. And our guardrails are literally what we are using to stay on track. And also want to speak to understanding that our board goals and guardrails have allowed us to think and realize that some of our students, when we talk about the inequities in society, some of our students are going to need more resources or more support in their educational settings. So that has been what has helped me to be able to implement the Joining Forces curriculum. Now, when I am working with schools, I'm thinking about how I'm going to train our schools and our school leaders and our school counselors, and everyone has been trained on provided professional development on redlining and all of the historical racist practices, and understanding how mass incarceration has impacted our students. This was an initiative from 2020 or 2021 last school year when we were virtual. So we made sure that everybody actually understood the historical what has happened to our Black and our Brown students, and now that has helped to push the need and desire to actually support our children who are experiencing parental incarceration or family incarceration in our schools.
Thank you so much. And I think this work is so incredible at the school level. As I mentioned before, I'm from the South. I was raised in Texas, and there's such a fight going on about teaching students about the history of the racist roots of our country and the roots in chattel slavery. And when you understand the roots that this country has in slavery and in white supremacy, you see the linkage between students who might need more resources and the linkage between that and communities that also need more resources as well. So I think this work is incredibly important and needed and timely, and I very, very much wish that it was replicated everywhere. Before I go into kind of how other schools can replicate this work, you also mentioned the survey, the wellness survey about your students. And I also think that's incredible work. We talked about really incorporating the views of people who are closest to the problem. I wanted to know how the idea for the survey came about and why it was decided to include the perspectives of students.
Yeah, so as mentioned, I can't remember Olivia if it was you or Diane, but student voice is one of the biggest things that we are looking to push education and how we are supporting our students. So we really wanted to make sure that we were able to include student voice, and we are also using the student well-being survey data to help inform our MTSS process, which is called the multi-tiered system of supports. So it's literally pushing our students from in tier 1 And we're looking to see how we can support our students in tier 2 and tier 3. The student well-being survey came about because we wanted to see how students were doing in their virtual learning. One of the biggest things that was a concern in the Office of School Climate and Culture is our students aren't making friends, the students don't know people. So we wanted to make sure that there was, as I mentioned about the community meeting, we were able to begin to implement the community meeting virtually. So we wanted to make sure that there were opportunities and students actually felt like there was opportunities to build relationships with their peers and also with adults. So we wanted to continue that as we return to in-person learning.
That's awesome. And just before I ask you one last question, I think it's really important what you said, that this is data. This is quantitative data, qualitative data that you're getting from students to create better programs that support them. That's the power of these interviews. And as you might be making the case in your own jurisdictions about incorporating more programming, by incorporating more surveys of students, getting their actual perspectives, asking them what they need, that is valuable data. And so people are pushing back and saying, okay, we need something that's more data informed. Well, this is a great way to get that information. So I think you can see, I think this is very, very cool. I think it's incredible. And I just want to ask you, how can other schools kind of build upon this work and implement this in their own jurisdictions?
Yeah, so I would say that one of the biggest things we talk about the adult SEL, right? So we're bringing in, when we are incorporating community meeting, we also are recognizing that we are building adult SEL. So I think one of the biggest things is to mention or train adults in the school communities on how parental incarceration and family incarceration impacts them or has impacted them. And then it will open up the eyes of people who are in the school buildings to say, like, we need to support our students, because if I have experienced this and other people within our school building as adults have experienced this and can speak to it, then we need to recognize that our students also are experiencing the same thing.
Thank you so much. And I saw that Dr. Hollins put a link in the chat to an event where you can learn more about implementing this in schools. I think this work is incredible and is very, very much needed. And it's programming that I might have needed in my childhood. So I think it's awesome. Moving over to Brandon, I wanted to ask you a couple questions. But I know we opened this panel with our identities. And I thought that was a really good way to highlight the many identities that we bring to this work and how that is very much an important part of our perspectives. Last week, if you guys were here for the youth listening session last week, one of the panelists said that she's a daughter of an incarcerated person, but she's many other things. She is several things. And so I wanted to hear from you, Brandon, about your several identities. Maybe if you could expand on them, what family looks like to you, what parenthood looks like to you, and how that informs your work.
Yeah, thanks for asking, Olivia. And Diane, I was thinking about something that you said, the thinking around sort of youth work as self-work. And I often say altruism is healing. And so like anytime we are doing acts of service, we are also healing ourselves. And there is so much in that for everyone, but it's like a critical piece of the work. And I could like respond to some things that other folks are saying. My background is of all of the things that I said and so many more that like won't fit into this Zoom box, but both of my parents were incarcerated. My mother was incarcerated for over 10 years. And so Asia, similar to your young people, like I experienced some really complicated moments in school. That was my entire sort of adolescent experience. Of just like navigating that and the sort of shame around it and the trauma around it and the like secrecy around it. And that, amongst other things, like life post incarceration and what it was like to have a mother who was out of jail work in the world of work for the first time, is like a different part of an identity, and just sort of experiencing her navigating the world. Like when she went in, there was no debit cards. And when she came out, there were like, I remember that moment at the gas station where I was like, how do I do this? And there were so many sort of moments of meaning making with her as we were on that journey together, our parenting, our family journey. And it informs the work for me in many ways. Like as I shared at the beginning, my experience from sort of teacher to principal to sort of big picture policy work with Mayor Bill de Blasio for New York City's 1.1 million children, and now leading a nonprofit organization myself, there is something for me that is always rooted in how it is easy on a policy level to sort of same the experiences that folks are having. And my sort of core value is to individualize them at every turn. And so it becomes for me so often less about like a student, and this goes back to knowing people, right? But like a student who is experiencing incarceration, it's like this big umbrella, and that is just so complicated. And instead of like knowing who a young person is, what their story is, where they're at with that story, and allowing it to also evolve. Every year is different in all of our lives. And folks who have been impacted by incarceration get the same permission for their families to look different every year, for their stories to look different every year. And we need educators who are not sort of with a narrow focus around someone's experience, but who are willing to sort of eyes wide open, engage with young people and see them as fully complex. And so that is the way that I do the work. It is how I think about the work. And even more like sort of top up, bottom down, it's how I think about youth work, but it's also how I lead people. It's how I manage teams of people. It is a parallel process for me. The way that I think about serving young people is very similar to how I think about managing adults. And I think if we lead with that level of empathy in both spaces, we will build organizations that promote healing and just as important, activate, accelerate learning so that the young people who are furthest away from the sphere of success, more often than not, have access to greatness and can produce great outcomes.
I love that. And I think I saw a reaction in the chat too, giving families permission to look differently. And that's something that Diane mentioned when you think about, creating a program that supports all kinds of trauma in the educational setting, but also seeing this as one way that families look differently and supporting different kinds of families in your work. When I lived with my grandparents for a little bit, having my grandma take me to school and knowing that that's one way that my family looks, and maybe there's one parent, maybe there's two parents, maybe there are several caretakers, and just really supporting families in the different ways that they can manifest, I think is really, really incredible. You ended that talking about creating good outcomes for students and for people who are marginalized, who are furthest away from like the locus of success, bringing them in and giving them services. If you could speak a little bit about your work now at Ivy Street School and the ways that you have to be informed about trauma to support your students. Is it necessary if you're working in like a disability environment to be trauma informed about the criminal legal system? Is it all the same thing? I would love to hear you speak about that.
So yes, it is. We are always, I will also just say this, and with love, but we are always working in a disability environment because folks around us are complicated, including ourselves. And so it's just sort of important and to honor that. The space that I work in is a sort of named affinity space. We sort of honor that everyone there has explicitly named that they have a disability. Some of that is because they're neurodivergent, but some of that is because their neurodiversity exists in their trauma and they're doing real healing work and are on an emotional journey of sort of realizing some of that. I think two things. One, to Diane's point earlier, the work will be better. We will serve young people better as parents, as caregivers, as educators, like in any space that interacts with young people, when we commit to our own healing. And that's all of us committing to our own healing. And that's like top down, bottom up, that like we recognize we are sort of works in process. And It doesn't mean, and it is a hard thing to do because for so many of us, it's like, wait a second, does that mean something bad happened to me? And the answer is always yes. Like all of us have experienced bad things. And at the same time, it's like the then question goes, does that also mean that the way that I experienced adolescence or learning or school, was that broken too? Because I don't want that. And the answer is also yes, like we're allowed to evolve. The modalities are allowed to evolve. It can be good and not good enough all at the same time. And like both can be true. Your experience could have been good and it might have not been good enough. And it might not be good enough today, given everything else that exists. So there's that work that needs to sort of be part of how we're thinking about systems thinking. But I think for me, at the core of how I think about all youth work is from a space of attachment. And it is around acknowledging that that one, forget disabilities, trauma, kids impacted by incarceration, that learning at its essence, so when you ask someone to go to school, learning is one of the most vulnerable things we can do. Like I am asking you to take an intellectual risk. It is incredibly vulnerable. It is incredibly vulnerable to read aloud. It is incredibly vulnerable to remember a multiplication table. It is incredibly vulnerable to solve a multi-quadratic equation. Like go all the way through learning. It is the most vulnerable thing to do. Adults, on some real talk, we resist it every day. And yet we put kids in a situation where they are charged with engaging in that vulnerability at a speed and a time on task that is real intense. And so in order to make that vulnerable space have the most meaning, we have to form bonds. And we have to recognize that to really be vulnerable, it requires attachment. We need to be attached to each other. For some of us, many of us, the stats are real, right? Many of us, most of us in these boxes have experienced disrupted attachment. That could be because a caregiver died, because of divorce, because our parents worked too much and it interrupted just a continuity of care. It could be because our parents were incarcerated. It could be for a whole list of reasons, but many of us experienced attachment, which is why we have trust issues, right? Most of the students in our classrooms have disrupted attachment. And so to get them to feel vulnerable to learn, to accelerate their learning, to create that opportunity, that is at the core of what educators have to do, is build trust, to get to know someone, to do it at a speed that feels safe, not too fast, but not too slow. And to be able to do that dance, and it really does, and I will land this plane in a second, but it goes back to what Diane says, you can only intentionally, at great rate, do good attachment work if you are at the same time doing your own healing work. And it is like, it must be a demand sort of top down from how we think about the training ground for teachers and educators to how we think about professional development on the most local level, that like doing work around our own lived experiences and identities will allow us to build closer bonds with kids. And to the young people's do's and don'ts, that doesn't mean we do it so we can share it. It doesn't mean we like do the work so that I can be like, me too, girl. It means we do the work so that we can understand how someone is also arriving at that moment, not so we can share stories.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you. I think that is incredible and is very difficult. It's maybe surprisingly difficult for adults to do that work, to understand their own trauma so they can build safe relationships with students, and not necessarily, like you said, to overshare, but to understand what students are going through and create a safe environment for them to share. I wish there were more spaces talking about how vulnerable it is to be a student and how vulnerable it is to be growing up and be an adolescent and what you need from adults. That is really incredible and should be spoken about more. On the same vein, I'm going to move to Mia a little bit, but Brandon talked about the need to build healthy attachment with adults and learn that relationships with adults can be safe. And adults should be doing their own trauma work so they can learn how to better assist their students. But one comment that we heard in last week's youth listening session is that one young person said that when an adult came to her and said, you know, I'm here to help, she learned immediately to distrust them, that they weren't sincere, that they were going to judge her or hurt her in some way. How can adults do more of what Brandon is calling for, and create a safe space and be that safe space for you to come to them and be honest with them and talk about what you need?
Yeah, Brandon, I love that you mentioned that you need to create safe spaces and to build genuine connections with students. I love that. I feel like it's very imperative that you build genuine and supportive connections with your students, mainly because when you look at it, you see your educators and your teachers more than you see your parents. You see them for 8 hours a day, you know, your parents work for the rest of the day. But yeah, it's very important to build reliable, genuine connections with educators and authority figures, and to understand that each child is different. They handle emotions different, especially when they're dealing with parental incarceration. Some of them, they act out. I know when I was a youth in middle school and high school, a lot of the educators and my teachers would just label me as a problem child, mainly because I didn't really know how to deal with my emotions at the time. And instead, I had some who actually molded and helped me and supported me when I needed, and asked, what do you need? You know what I mean? How can I support you? How can I help you in this situation that you're going through? So I was fortunate enough to have those mentors and that guidance as a young one. So yeah, I feel like that's why it's so important to build genuine connections with students and youth who are not only dealing with parental incarceration, but youth who are just struggling at home. So yeah.
I completely agree, and why it's not helpful to label people as, you know, problem people or problem children, especially when it comes to this myth that children of incarcerated parents are more likely or 6 times more likely to be incarcerated themselves, when, you know, we can talk about the root causes of crime. But here are people who have experienced trauma, who instead of getting support to their trauma are getting blamed for their trauma and their way of processing, and what they need is a safe space. You mentioned that there were adults in your life who you were able to open up to, who were able to build those healthy attachments with you. What are some things or people in your journey that have empowered you, that made you feel safe, that made you feel normal? Can you share a little bit about those?
Yeah, sure. When I was in high school, I joined a program. It's called the Youth Action Council. It's part of with the Osborne Association. It's basically like a group of youth from the ages of 15, 14, up until like 17 and 18, who gather together and just support one another and find ways to advocate for youth who experience parental incarceration, like myself. And it's basically just like we uplifting one another, supporting each other academically, stuff of that nature. So yeah, just fostering that sense of community, that you're not alone. You know what I mean? That you have people there who are experiencing the same things that you're going through and who can relate to you personally. So yeah.
Yeah. And what schools do to kind of foster that kind of environment? Maybe start their own action councils?
Yeah. I mean, other schools as well, like for guidance counselors as well as educators, they can refer youth like myself to programs such as the Youth Action Council, like Osborne, or other programs that you all have mentioned before. Like Diane has mentioned, sorry for my dog.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
And I'll finally to Asia, best for last. But I wanted to hear from you, from your perspective, what were some of the best parts of being involved in raising your children and also being involved in their education? And what way for you was it fulfilling and really important to be involved with their administrators and with their educators?
So one of the best parts for me were gaining my children's trust and respect, knowing that even though I was in prison, that I was able to fight for them, that I was willing to do whatever it took to be a part of their lives, and that I was more focused on their academic success than I was on the fact that I wasn't there present because I couldn't change my situation. And, you know, at a very young age, my daughter had said that she didn't want to go to college. She was 4 because her father had said that I was in college and I was always away from her. So I remember being honest with my kids at that very young age because I understood how important it was for them. I didn't want them to see education as an obstacle between us. And I didn't want them to grow up hating going to school because I was in prison, but you really can't help those things. Kids don't really like school that much. But having their respect, gaining their trust, knowing that I had their best interests. I was able to do these things because I had the support of the Parent Center. We had an advocacy program that allowed me to call their schools once a week. But prior to getting to that point, I I had to fight with the guidance counselors. I had to go to family court to get to have permission to see my children regularly when their father believed that it wasn't important for me to see them. I always knew that if my children wanted to see me, I will do whatever it took to see them. So I fought. I told them I'm taking daddy to court. If this is not what you want me to do, let me know now. And they were both on board. So I always listen to my children. I think it's very important to listen to what the kid wants. I never wanted them to feel like they had to come to prison to see me, or that they had to choose between me and a normal life. But my children made me understand that this was their life. This was their normal life. They always knew mommy being in prison, not being at home. We don't have those memories of me being home until now. And I just want to clarify, when I said that I was in Panama and Central America, I'm not here on a trip. I'm not here on vacation. I was deported after being released. So I am still parenting from a distance. So I'm even, fighting harder to be a part of their lives. My daughter is in the 12th grade now, and she's ready to graduate. As I always say to her, you have no choice. You're going to college. So I choose now because you're going. But they do understand the importance of education and how it can save their lives, how it can keep you on the right track, how having the right support is what you really need to be successful in life. And so I aim to be on their butts if that's what I need to do. Now I call their school constantly. I call my children every morning, as I used to do when I was in prison, with a 20-30 minute phone call. Are you on the bus? Are you almost there? I started all of this because my daughter started cutting school, and I called the school one day and I was told it was 10 o'clock in the morning. She's not there, and I panicked. And I called her father, and I just, to find my child, I don't know where she is. You need to find her now. And ever since that day, he didn't fight me anymore, but he also didn't support me. So I always had to navigate around that. But one of my proudest moments is knowing that my daughter called me and she said, I wrote my college entry exam and I want you to read it. And it was dedicated to me and our relationship. And it was sad, and it was also very amazing. I was honored that she did that. But she continues to be affected by my incarceration and our release because I was deported. Both my kids are affected, and I don't think that that's going to change anytime soon. I'm not, and even if I was there, I don't think that it will change. It will still be an adjustment. And for those of you who have experienced that, having your parent at home, it doesn't solve the problem. It just creates, we have to learn to navigate how to continue to have this relationship, this loving relationship, when it's not, we don't live in a perfect world.
We don't, but I think what is really, really inspiring is that you fought every step of the way to be a part of their lives, to parent them, to be an example to them. And I think under incredible odds, you have really done that, and you've achieved something incredible that I wish for every parent to be able to achieve. Are there things that schools themselves, so there was an advocacy program in your correctional unit, are there things that schools themselves can do to support parents like you who are fighting to stay active in their children's lives, who are fighting to, keep on their kids and to make sure they're going to school? It seems like your daughter did a better job going to school than I did. So are there things that schools can do to help keep you in the loop and empower you and give you what you need?
Absolutely. I just think that the biggest hurdle was schools believing that they need consent from the guardian for the incarcerated parent to contact them. That is the biggest hurdle. Because if we don't have a great relationship, they're never gonna agree, and I'm never gonna be able to contact the school. But because I am annoying and persistent, I took advantage of the Aspen Association has always been an organization that has helped us, the incarcerated, and I was able to meet judges and school district counselors and even superintendents. And I always voiced my concern and my experience. And at every one of those meetings, I met someone who said, I am going to help you. I never forget this man named Steve. I only remember him by his first name. And when I voiced my concern about not being able to contact my children's school because of their father, he says, I'm going to help you. 2 weeks later, I had my daughter's guidance counselor call me and said, I am sorry, I apologize. I'm here to assist you in anything I can. I know that he was reluctant, but it gave me great satisfaction to know that he understood. You didn't have to give me permission, but now you have to listen to me because my voice and what I think is best for my children matters, especially if you see the progression. My daughter was cut in school. She failed 5 out of the 7 classes in that particular term. And the moment I started getting in contact, the moment I started calling the school at least twice a week, I was calling constantly to check if she punched in on time. What class is she in right now? I was tracking her. Till this day, my daughter has not cut school and she has not been late to school. And when I speak to the counselor, he always says to me, I don't know what you said to her, I never hit my children, never, not once. I just spoke to my daughter and I gave her options. And ever since, she has yet to cut school, she has yet to be late. And so I am very proud of that. I am very proud that because I had the support of Osborne and the Children's Center and other women who have been in my position, they were able to educate me on how to do things the right way. I was able to remain a constant figure in my children's life. And they know that when it comes to education, they're not to play with me at all.
I love that. It's giving definitely Mama Bear energy, and it's just so heartwarming to see how passionate you are about this. I think my last question for you would be if you could speak a little bit about the work that you've done inside and the work that you've done to help other moms, other parents who are in your position and fight to maintain relationships with their children. What kind of guidance did you provide?
Actually, it's one of the things that I'm most proud of. The work that I did while I was incarcerated. I worked for 10 years. I worked for the Parenting Center as a prenatal facilitator. I taught prenatal classes to women who were pregnant, who wished to participate in the nursery program, whether they were accepted or not, because that's also a process. I was very happy because when I got arrested, I was pregnant. And initially I didn't see the connection, but having someone to tell you, I've been in your position, not just saying, I know what you feel. I exactly know what you feel. The anxiety of not knowing, am I gonna be able to keep my child for a year? Or am I gonna have to send this child home? So I was able to show them that I did it. I've been in your position, and I know I didn't get accepted to the nursery, but I've been able to maintain a constant relationship with my children, and I'm very active in their lives. And so I utilize my experiences as a tool to teach them. You have a responsibility. Parenthood is not simple. Motherhood is not a simple thing, but it's very rewarding. And we just have to fight just a little harder to be a part of their lives. If they know that you're trying, they are going to love and value that. And no one will be able to tell your child, your mom is a bad person, because in their eyes, in my children's eyes, I am mommy first. What I did back 17 years ago and the time that I spent in prison is irrelevant to my kids, because they know me as mommy, the woman that comes to my rescue, the one that's able to fight for me, the one that will stand up to my dad, the one who's able to send me a lotion if I need it because I'm ashy. All of those things matter, whether you are at home or you're incarcerated. And so I'm proud of the work that I did as a prenatal facilitator. I'm proud of the work that I did as a doula. I spent sometimes nights and days with women who are, postpartum, after postpartum, taking care of their children, helping them, because I believe that giving birth is a job in itself, and we need to heal, and we're not robots, and we need help, and we need to be nurtured. Women need to be loved in order for them to love their children. And so I was able to provide that love when it was necessary, and also tough love when it was necessary. Because we don't have the ability to just lay down and say, I can't do this. No, you have to do it. We have to do this for our children. And so I did that for many years, and I'm still seeking work as a doula now. I am on the path to certification, and I'm very, very happy because I just love being able to help women understand their role as mothers and as advocates and as everything else that involves being a mother.
That is so incredible, and I saw the chat going off. I think it is again really awesome. Like your Mama Bear energy, the way that you are so committed to not only being a mother but helping other people realize, being a parent and what that entails. I think that's incredible. So thank you so much for sharing and being vulnerable and sharing all that with us. I know that we are a little bit over time right now, but I did want to go through the list again and do rapid fire. Maybe 1 or 2 sentences, but what are the biggest obstacles to your work? And then what are actionable solutions to those obstacles? One of the big things that you hear from practitioners and people who might not work in educational settings, but work with children every day, so caretakers, doctors, therapists, people who are on the front lines working with children, is that they're overwhelmed. They say, okay, well, what can I do? That's such a macro issue. Like, what am I supposed to do about this? And there are micro solutions, but you can also lobby and advocate for macro solutions. There are things that you can do no matter what your role is. And so I would love to hear, I'll start back from the beginning and start with Diane. What are some of the biggest obstacles to your work? And then what are actionable solutions to address those obstacles in 2 minutes?
Sure, no problem. Asia, let me just say hats off to you as a mother, hearing you talk about fighting to be a part of your kids' lives and all that you did for other mothers. I just kudos to you. It's incredible. Thank you. Biggest obstacles to our work really is often the other adults. it is often, how we as a country think about those who are incarcerated, quite frankly. The reason, right, we have been trained to believe and think that people who are incarcerated are not good parents, shouldn't be a part of their lives, or should be marginalized. And so a big piece of our work is helping people to understand two pieces. One is that those who are incarcerated are still citizens, should be valued, and in many cases should be a part of a kid's life. And then even if not, I mean, if you can't sort of value their parent, you cannot take that out on their kids. And I think that how we as Americans think about crime and incarceration and criminals, I mean, I got my air quotes here, criminals, play such a big part and what a part of what we as a country have to really face. And Shannon talked a little bit earlier about sort of the intersection, of course, of race and discrimination. And I think that because many young people who have parents incarcerated are Black and Brown, we have not addressed this issue with the kind of thoughtfulness and expediency and careful consideration, because Black and Brown children often are left behind. The resources are not always there for them. And quite frankly, the will of the country to want to ensure that Black and Brown kids have the resources they need to thrive is not there. We're seeing some of this in the last year and a half. So I think, we gotta try to ride this wave and really help people to see our young people as anyone else and as valued as anyone else. So I think that the micro things that we do, it is in our classrooms, it is in our schools, it is in how we come to understand sort of this bigger impact of mass incarceration, how we talk about it, how our churches engage more deeply, right, in creating thriving and equitable communities. So, and I see some of this happening. I want to, we talk about a lot of the problems, but I do want to be when you hear Brandon and Asia and others, it's happening in places, and how we just really push that to create stronger communities that allow our young people to grow up in these communities where they feel safe, right? Where they are supported, where we're sharing power and we're challenging growth. But that's each one of us taking those actions each and every day to begin to change that narrative and to push our local elected officials and to challenge our families, on perspectives as well.
Thank you so much. I completely agree. There's so much that we can do to build the political will to get things done. Because I agree, I think there isn't always a desire to fix something. And that's something that we can do is organize. But I really loved, and you mentioned this earlier in the panel, this work is already happening. We already have great models for this. There are people on this panel who are doing incredible, incredible things, and people who attended this panel who want to learn more about this. So, it's eating the elephant one bite at a time, but we've already started. We've already put out the plates, the silverware, everything. We've already begun this work. So I want to thank you so much for that and for everything that you already do. Moving on to Shannon, same thing, obstacles to your work, but also what are the actionable things that we can do to address those obstacles and make your work easier for you?
Yeah, definitely. And Asia, I just want to speak to you, and something that you mentioned was about just having conversations with the school counselor. In some of the work that I just experienced, just 2 weeks ago, we have a list of 10 fathers that want to participate, that are currently incarcerated, and they want to participate in their child's parent-teacher conference. And there was a concern around if the incarcerated parent can actually participate in the parent-teacher conference, because maybe there's some type of issue with the guardian or family member who is not in prison. And I was like, we can't think like that. I had to actually debunk. So as Diane, you're speaking about just the adults and the individuals that we're working with, we need to educate the adults because they're very ignorant. And I say it in a way of I'm very fortunate to work with people who are very open-minded and want to learn about what they don't know about. But so that's one thing. And then also, as I mentioned before about the Joining Forces curriculum, in order to implement the Joining Forces curriculum, we have to, we are relying on students sharing that they actually are experiencing parental incarceration or incarceration of a family member or a loved one. So that's one of our biggest barriers in terms of like, how do we know what students are experiencing this, right? And that's why we took the approach of, okay, well, we know about mass incarceration and let's build this community. So that's why we're taking the approach of like, let's bring it, instead of it being more of a tier 2 approach, let's bring it as a tier 1 approach, because we talk about resources and supports that our students and our babies in the city need. This is one that obviously we need. So that's how we're trying to combat that, and really just like trying to build the community and educate everyone.
Yes, we're definitely seeing a theme of building community, creating those relationships, educating the people around you. Those seem to be what's coming up for other people. So Brandon, moving on to you, what are the obstacles in your work, and what are the actionable solutions that we can take to make your work easier and to help you? Oh, you're on mute.
I'm unmuted now. Asia, I wanted to say thank you too for sharing with such force. And I will also say, like not every parent shows up in the way that you did and do. And that is neither good nor bad. That is just the complexities of the system. And so like, I would be remiss as we like honor you, and rightly so, because like you are a force, that not everyone feels either empowered enough to show up that way, or has the support, like even from Osborne, in the way to sort of show up like that. And for schools and folks who are listening as educators, that does not make them good or bad in the role of parent. I show up late like at least twice a week picking up my kid from school. So like, like that, one moment or a series of moments does not define how we feel and what we want and where we want to go with our child. And so I just want to honor that as we move. But if I think about the greatest barrier in the work, there are two for me. One is shame. It is the shame that our young people move through. It is the shame that the parent who is incarcerated feels. It is the shame that the guardian feels who has primary custody at the moment. And in that shame, we train kids to lie about where their parents are, to lie about their family story, to learn that that to be accepted, it is to not live in your truth. And that is a dangerous message that we send to young people. And so shame is our greatest barrier, because kids who grow up in shame experience shame as an adult. And the manifestation of shame as an adult is just very real. So I name that. And the way to combat shame, there are so many ways, but one is through community. We honor that there are sacred and special spaces for all of us, and we build those. We do the work ourselves to sort of live our own truth and be out and visible in ways that when we can and feel safe to do it. And on the back end, the same way we would if a family was divorced or something else was happening at the home, we honor that even though these situations may feel complicated for us who have not experienced them directly, that whether it's from a guidance counselor, school social worker, an advisory teacher, or the principal or assistant principal of a school, on a local level, it is our job to unpack each family's story so we can figure out how to best support them in serving the young person. And so if that is managing difficult conversations, I'm even thinking about Asia's situation, right? Like managing difficult conversations with custodial parents in that moment on why this is a sum total win. The engagement of an incarcerated parent is a sum total win. Like being the young person's advocate and holding difficult conversations with parents is part of leading systems. It is part of leading a school. And so we need educators who are willing to take part in some of those tough conversations with families in service of kids, in service of reducing shame.
And I also want to thank you for the level setting, that there are many different conditions that might exist in a relationship, and they are neither good nor bad. They're just different in the ways that they show up. And there might not be parents who show up in the way that Asia did, but it's just different. And I think that's something that like I want to do better and incorporating into these discussions, and we should all do better to think about. I opened this panel also, grounding the panel, excuse me, in busting myths and really killing those ideas that we had before about what we need to do to support children of incarcerated parents. And I think that is a really, really important thing, is busting the myth of the worthy, unworthy parent because of the way that they're able to show up, and not everyone can. That's just the nature of humanity and dealing with different people. So I really, really appreciate that. And I think that adds so much, especially at the end of this conversation. Moving next to Mia, are there barriers that you found in your work, and are there actionable ways that people can support you?
Yeah, some barriers that I've faced is stigma, and we need to get rid of that stigma and labeling youth. Be mind educators as well as administrating. People, they need to be mindful of word choice and how these words can affect these children, not only in academic setting, but also in the social setting as well. These choice of words can affect their lives, their confidence in school, and hinder them from living in their truth. You know what I mean? Expressing how they really feel, and like Brandon said, allowing them not to live in shame. You know what I mean? So some children like myself, I didn't feel comfortable sharing to other people how I experienced parental incarceration. You know what I mean? I used to hide from that and be ashamed of that until I worked with the Osborne Association, and I felt comfortable advocating and meeting youth like myself. So yeah, that's one actionable way.
Yes, build community. And I read years ago, I don't remember where, that the opposite of shame isn't pride, it's community. And that pride can take a long time to get to. It's a pretty hefty ask to have people be proud of something publicly that used to cause them shame. But what we can do is provide community. And that is a way to overcome that stigma and hopefully eventually lead to pride later on. And then finally, I want to ask Asia, what are the obstacles that show up for you, and what are actionable ways that people can support you or make your work easier? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Can't get used to this. Okay, so the teenagers that I'm supporting obviously are my children, and I just see our distance now, me being in another country and them being in the United States, as another obstacle that hasn't been an easy one, but I feel like I have so much experience in parenting from a distance that I have a bit of more resources. I am able to call my children when I want, and they can call me whenever they want, and they can walk into a room and say, "My mom's on the phone. Can you talk to her?" And which is often the case. But I think that the distance has been the biggest obstacle for me. I can't remember a time when I have given up on something, especially when it comes to my children. But I'm committed to continue to fight for them. I am committed to getting my daughter in Fordham University. It's what we're working on right now. As a Hispanic student, they have a great scholarship program there. And so I just continue to do those things until we're able to be united again. I believe that having my children believe in me is all the fuel I need, because they constantly call me to say, "This happened, mommy, take care of it." And I just love that they know that even if I'm unable to do it, they know that I know someone who's able to do so. And so that it makes me very happy, very proud that my past experiences has definitely shaped my life. It has shaped their life. It continues to shape their lives, and they have to adjust. But if they're able to, my children are so resilient, as are many children, especially those of incarcerated parents. I'm very proud of them. I'm very proud of how they have handled themselves, how they continue to strive to be better despite the life that they had to live because of my choices. But right now, I just feel like I have a little bit more of an advantage, and instead of seeing it as a bigger obstacle, I'm taking advantage of every opportunity I have to be able to provide to my children what they need.
I think one thing I just want to add as well is the intersectionality of several issues. Brandon mentioned that you talked about, you know, your struggle being entangled in the immigration system. There are so many things that we can do to help unite families like yours that don't necessarily seem like they're directly tied to changing carceral circumstances. But I really do hope and believe that you will be reunited so you can take care of everything. You can be the fixer in your kids' lives in person again. And when you said that they trust you, they know you're gonna get it done, like hearing you speak, I know that too. I can tell that you'll figure it out, or you'll figure out a way to get it done later. So I really wanna thank you just for your passion and for sharing that with us today. And with that, I know we are right up on time. We have 5 minutes left. If there are any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll try to follow up later by email, just because I don't want to go too long. So please let us know and we'll try to get back to you. But I do want to allow Mia to close the panel and talk a little bit more about Osborne's work and what you can do to get involved with SUSU in your own domains.
Sure. Thank you for attending this youth listening session. It's been an honor to be a part of this panel. All you all, yeah, it's amazing. You all are champions. Woo -woo. I invite you all to join the SUSU network to receive updates throughout the year by going to the SUSU website. This week is Champions Week. There's still time to nominate a champion for children whose parents are incarcerated. Champions, big or small, are welcome. Nominate someone by going to SUSU's website, home, see us, support us, and follow SUSU on social media. SUSU cultivates in the month of all activities of October, but children need to be seen and supported all year round. The recommendations from this week and last week's youth listening session will be written up and shared. It takes us all to realize these recommendations and build on what's working in order to create a supportive, inclusive, and nurturing places and spaces. Thank you to my fellow panelists and to Olivia, our moderator. You did an amazing job. And the SUSU National Planning team. And to all, have a good night.
Thanks everyone so much for attending. Have a great night. You will get a write-up of this afterwards. But again, I want to thank the incredible panelists. I didn't do anything. All I did was kind of direct the conversation and let you guys share. And it was really, really incredible. So thank everyone so much. And thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Awesome.